Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answers should shine. The fact is fiction, conviction.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories.
Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you're watching the Muddy Waters Podcast. The Muddy Waters Podcast, as always, exists to help the people of Maine better understand what is going on in our state. Unfortunately, the mainstream media does not have a serious interest in making sure the people of Maine are informed. If anything, in their role as propaganda arm of the Democrat Party, they want to point you to what's happening in Washington, D.C., or Iran, or Israel, or I guess they've forgotten about Ukraine these days, but they want you to point you to anything but what's happening in your backyard where you have the most ability to influence it. And so we try to focus on things that are actually happening here in the state and bring in people who are experts from around the state on different issues. Today, we're blessed to have with us an expert in the issue of energy, which is one of the most important and most significant issues, I think, facing Mainers, as well as, I think, one of the issues that is going to influence how people in Maine vote in this very important 2026 gubernatorial election, as well as all the state legislative positions. So thank you so much for joining us, Matt, especially with this really important topic.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's always fun. It's good to see you, man.
Must be nice to be popular, but it's for a bad reason, right?
I just think all business good goes, right? I'm happy to be popular.
Well, you're definitely one of the leading voices that I keep hearing from a number of people. I've obviously, like you've been on the podcast before, and you're a regular, I think, or have been on the Ray Richardson show and probably other places. And I think I heard your name cited by a number of people in I don't think you were cited in the Democrat gubernatorial debate, but you were cited in the Republican gubernatorial debate. But obviously cited as somebody who's an expert in the field of energy and trying to figure out what the solution is, because I think nobody is questioning whether or not there's a problem. And part of the reason I wanted to have you on is because, I find it interesting, a couple of things, and this is one of the most significant issues is energy, right? Cost of our power, right? And how that impacts the rest of the economy, which I'll let you get into. But what I found to be interesting is I don't just listen to my side. And so I've listened to a lot of Republican gubernatorial debates basically since about a year ago today. They haven't been the first one that I saw, the forum that was put on by the Common Sense for Maine PAC. And, most recently, with the televised debates, I decided that I'd go in and listen to the Democrats as well. And just broadly speaking, the Republicans I see as people who are diagnosing the problem, trying to figure out how we got here, and then trying to backtrack the issues that the government did that contributed toward us arriving at the current place that we're at, and then providing a solution going forward from there, right? On the Democrat side, there is an attempt to figure out where to go from here. And the spoiler alert is, generally speaking, it's spend more money. But they don't ever do the diagnosis of how we got here, which I find to be very, very fascinating. But
yeah, I think two things. First of all, I think that they also are solving a different problem. Right. So Republicans are trying to solve affordability, reliability, resilience, and they understand that those things are prerequisites for an economy, for a business, because most of them run a business. I understand if I can't get cheap energy, I can't play here. And we've seen that in Maine. 20 paper mills have closed in the last 20 years. We've had, many business closures here just this year. Up in Burnham, we lost the Lincoln Log guys, and of course the cement factory last year out in Thompson. And all this is due to high energy costs. Cape Cod potato chips left Cape Cod. They're now being produced in South Carolina. Same issue, the New England grid and the expense to run. So I think the Republicans are more taking it from that perspective, that I understand the impact. Democrats, that's not even on their radar. It's about, at least the debates that I've seen, it's about carbon reduction. And this is the problem that they are trying to solve. It's two very different problems. And I think that's why you see such a big divide.
Well, I agree in general. I do think there has been some conversation around how to make it more affordable. However, their solutions don't make sense. Their solutions on how to make it more affordable are, well, we have to raise taxes. We don't say this directly, but essentially we have to raise taxes so that we can subsidize clean energy, so that we can make clean energy affordable. But then again, we kind of talked about before, even when they do that, they're still not affordable for a variety of reasons that we could get into. But their solution is it doesn't address the reliable baseload energy, which is one of the things that you hammered home, I think, on the last time you were on, and just how important it is to have the ability to easily produce the amount of energy that is necessary at any given time without having to turn on really expensive versions of energy.
Well, it's interesting, Chuck, because when you understand how the grid actually works, then you realize the fallacies of the intermittent weather dependent generation, because demand is not intermittent or weather dependent. Demand is constant and it's predictable. We have peaks and lows, but we know when they're coming, and we can predict them with great accuracy because we know what's turning on, what's turning off. And when you understand that, then you understand that dispatchable generation that I can turn up as the demand turns up and turn down when I don't need it, that's really important. But if you also understand that winter reliability is really important and these things matter. One of the things I think since the last, I can't remember when I was on, but I've done, I do a lot of writing about energy on a Substack piece, and I of course talk about it on a race show every Tuesday. But one of the things that happened during Winter Storm Fern, which was when it got really cold in January for a couple of weeks, I don't know if you remember, but now that it's summertime outside.
That was right. My wife actually arrived for the first time ever, having lived her entire life in Africa, on January 18th. And it was pretty cold there.
Let's just say it was right. So during that time, what we've done in New England is we have systematically denied the permitting of pipelines. Okay, so over the last 10 years, 15 years, there have been 3 major pipelines proposed from the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania to New England, and not because of any other reason that the demand didn't justify it. And every time Massachusetts and New York, using environmental regulation, stopped them. Okay, so fast forward, so we had 3 pipelines proposed. Fast forward today, and the rhetoric around that was we are getting rid of fossil fuels. We're going to do renewables. I don't call them renewables. I call them weather dependent independent, because they're not renewables, but they're intermittent weather dependent generators. and we won't need all this gas, so we're not building that infrastructure. So what happened during Winter Storm Fern was that for about 4 days, 40% of our electricity was generated from burning oil, because we couldn't get enough natural gas because the pipes were full and we couldn't put any more through it, but we still needed more electricity. So we burned natural gas. 35% of the natural gas we were burning was LNG, because liquid natural gas, just like they use in Europe, because we couldn't get enough through our pipes. And because of the Jones Act, and I won't get into the arcane nature of that, that natural gas, that LNG, came from Trinidad and Tobago, Venezuela, and up till a couple of years ago, Russia, right? So that's those things. So we exchanged 3 pipelines from Marcellus Shale, which is about $3 an MMBTU, and we're buying LNG for $10, $20, $50, $100 an MMBTU, depending upon the weather. And that's why your electricity bill goes up. So if you diagnose the why, then you can say, okay, let's attack that cost. It's the cost of 60% of our electricity is generated by natural gas, either LNG or piped. And if the natural gas spikes, why then your electricity spikes, it follows that. What's worse during Fern, and this is my favorite, because 2 weeks before, Governor Healy of Massachusetts and Governor Mills of Maine held press conferences extolling the virtues of the new corridor that just got turned on. And isn't this great? They're going to be bringing 1.5 megawatts of clean hydropower from Canada into Iceland, New England. Maura Healy's press conference, she had a big light switch that she threw. It was as big as me, and she threw the switch. During Fern, we were burning oil to make electricity, and we sent it north through the corridor to Quebec because they were so dang cold too, and they needed more electricity than they could produce even with their hydro. For the last 5 years, Quebec Hydro has restricted electricity to New England during winter cold snaps because they're not making enough. That's a little secret that most people don't know. And until you diagnose the problem of why has our electricity price gone up? Why has our natural gas price gone up? Until you ask that hard question, you'll come up with solutions like, well, we need just to build more solar.
Well, so a couple things that come out of that are, I think, really interesting. So in Maine, what are what do they consider to be renewable and clean?
Solar, hydro, and wind.
They include.
Oh, and burning trap.
Do they include hydro? Because don't we have
hydro is its own category? It's not in the renewables,
right?
Yeah.
Well, this is why this is really important, because like what you're highlighting is that they were praising hydro from Canada, but they're trying to limit hydro in Maine and not calling it renewable.
Consistency is not as strong.
It's not as strong as I would agree. The other thing that I was remembering as you were talking about this is from the debates, I have heard them talk about holding CMP accountable. And so like some of the claims that they were making, the Democrats, because like in addition to the fact that they're not effectively diagnosing the problem as you've kind of done right here, right? And said, look, the problem is we need this, and we don't have what we need essentially. And it's largely because of supposedly clean energy policies that are not actually clean energy and are also like they're incredibly damaging to our economy. And especially like one of the other things that needs to be highlighted before we jump off to this is that like natural gas is actually like the new natural gas. I would say the current version is very clean for a fossil fuel.
Yes, it's 50% cleaner than burning oil. Is it perfect? No, but it is perfect given all the parameters. If you care about reliable, affordable, and resilient energy, then it's as good as you got.
Right. Not calling it perfectly clean, obviously, as you said, but it is substantially better than what we've been burning.
Oil or coal, for sure, right, by a long shot.
Exactly. And one of the things
but Chuck, here's the thing. We set up a dichotomy, right? It's solar and wind versus natural gas. The problem is that solar and wind cannot work without natural gas because it gets dark every night. Right. And the wind doesn't blow every day. And so what do I need something underneath that to make up for that intermittency. I mean, that's a feature of those of those systems. And so if we don't have gas behind it, what do you have? And people, and before the calls and letters come in to Chuck Ellis, not to me, but to Chuck Ellis's email, someone's going to say batteries. And I don't know if you remember last fall, the governor opened up the new battery in Gorham. And to great fanfare, the big scissors, and they cut the thing, and fabulous, good, excellent. I did the math. That battery in Gorham during the New England peak, so during Fern, all the energy it can store would have lasted 40 seconds. So the amount of battery scale that you've got to build to make any kind of impact is massive. And ask California if they like battery fires, because they've had a bunch of them. And what happens with battery fires is you can't put them out. And if you have grid scale battery facilities, they burn for days and days and days because you can't put them out. And so I like to say there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And we're making some bad trades right now. I mean, my last Substack piece, I started off, what's the worst trade in New England history? Was it Mookie? Was it Babe? I think it's trading Marcellus shale gas for LNG and oil. I think that's the worst trade New England ever made.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. I don't know if I read the entire thing, but I did start reading that. And
it's long. It's really, and I apologize for that, but it's a real important piece about how we got here and the pipelines that we defeated, that we sorely need now, and we defeated them, I think, really out of ignorance and exuberance.
Well, and I think, again, we've talked about this before, and I'm sure I've talked about it in the podcast, but there's also even if even if we could get enough battery power to, and we could get enough solar panels and wind turbines to be able to generate electricity to the point where we could store it, right? Let's say that it got to the point where it could generate more than we needed, and we were able to, at any given time, and we were able to store it. Even if that environment exists, what do we do with the batteries afterwards? The environmental impact. Well, how you pay for them for sure, but there's also the environmental impact of the batteries themselves, which
there are no solutions, only trade-offs. That's right.
Exactly, and they're bad trade-offs, is what you're saying, and I agree with that. Well, and one of the other things, and I want to go. I was trying to get here earlier, but I got appropriately sidetracked with some of the things that the Democrat candidates for governor were saying about what the part of the problem, and they're basically throwing CMP under the bus. It's everybody's favorite thing to do is blame CMP, and partly this is very effective if you don't care about truth and you only care about being able to not look like the bad guy, right? So instead of the Democrats owning the reality that they are the reason that we have higher energy costs, they're placing the blame at the foot of CMP, which the average person has absolutely no idea about how energy is produced and delivered. All they know is that they get a bill from CMP, and so they don't realize, and they know that there's two sections of that bill, but how many of them actually realize that part of that CMP has absolutely no say over?
Chuck, I think it's worse than what you're even describing. Utilities are so heavily regulated. We can't raise rates on our own. PUC has to approve it. We can't make capital decisions on our own. The PUC has to approve it. And so the capital decisions, not only can I make independent ones, CMP is forced to make capital decisions around connecting solar panels. They would never do it, but they've got to charge you for that big wire for a field that works about 13% of the time, and then charge it back to the ratepayer. But that's all by direction by the legislature and regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. They didn't do that on their own.
Which is the PUC, is the Public Utilities Commission, which is a government entity which basically determines what the pricing structure is going to be for all of our energy. So the government is actually directly responsible for the cost of energy.
And here's the thing that people don't realize. Stop for just a second. The chairman of the Maine Public Utilities Commission, you know what his job was before that? Do you know? He was head of the Democrat Party in Maine. So this is one big cabal around climate. This is what they've done. And so don't tell me it's not a political entity. Of course it is. But that political entity determines what utilities are allowed to charge ratepayers. And none of the charges on your bill is not approved by the commission. And so most of those charges are dictated by the commission. And so to blame CMP is completely disingenuous.
Well, especially because what they were claiming was CMP, they're partially blaming CMP for the additional costs that they're having to put into infrastructure, which, if I recall, there was another energy buff that I had been talking to before I started talking to you, but whether it was him or you who was telling me this, like a significant portion of that cost is happening specifically because they're needing to upgrade because of all the wind and solar that's coming online. So it's even that cost, which they're trying to level at CMP, is actually the government's fault.
They mandated solar and wind. That requires transmission and distribution expense. Transformers have to be beefier, wires have to be bigger, and built to places that didn't exist before. And so somebody's got to pay for that. And the government figured out, CMP will just charge for it. It's not a tax. Nobody will blame us. I think it's as cynical as that. I really do.
Yeah.
And what's worse is because the prices of energy have gone up so high, and we have essentially run a German-style deindustrialization in Maine. And if you don't believe that, go to any paper mill town that's closed in the last 20 years because of energy costs. The problem is 20 paper mills existed in Maine that don't exist today 20 years ago. So those were all big companies that paid into the big pot, that paid for transmission lines, that paid for distribution charges. They're all gone now. And so all of those charges go to the ratepayer, the individual homeowner. And that's another big reason why our rates keep going up. When you deindustrialize, your taxes go up because they don't pay property taxes, and your energy bills go up because they don't pay for part of the infrastructure.
Well, so what's interesting about that, and I'd like to kind of pose this question to you and let you kind of run with it, because like one of the concerns, they're actually like actively not. So we've obviously scared a bunch of business away, but we're also like, we almost passed a bill placing a moratorium on being able to bring in AI data centers, because wouldn't more businesses using energy drive the cost up more? And it seems like what you're saying is that that's not the case.
No, it's completely backwards. It's completely backwards.
So help people understand how that works. I mean, obviously so because you've got a new business, it's adding more demand. How does that more demand actually end up resulting in a lower price in this case?
Yeah. So as we build more generation, then, say let's build dispatchable generation that is, the cheapest you can build right now, which is natural gas, and in a new generator. And we put on, say, 4 megawatts. I use that number, or gigawatts, and I use that number strategically, and I'll come back to it. But let's say we build a plant that does 4 gigs. That data center is only a 2 gig data center. Well, I've got a facility now that can build. Now I've got 2 extra gigawatts that I can put out into the grid. That's not oil and not LNG, because presumably I brought the gas in from Pennsylvania to make that happen. Now I'm reducing the total, what electricity costs across the system, because I have more things generating. That's the math. It's just as simple as that. The more electricity that gets produced, the cheaper it becomes. It's the supply and demand, right? Right now, I've got a very limited supply and a constant demand. If I can keep that demand constant or growing slightly and grow generation, by then I've got more supply in the market than I've got demand, and consequently prices will go down across. That's how it was until we started putting solar and wind on the system, right? And that's really the issue. Why do I say 4 megawatts? Here's how the Democrats. And I hate to be pejorative, but it is. There's something called the New England Heat Pump Contract, or Compact, and it's 5 of the 6 New England states, and I'll let you guess which one it isn't. Have taken. There was $450 million from the Inflation Reduction Act under Biden that did not get sequestered with the Big Beautiful Bill, and its aim is to put 530 new heat pumps in operation in New England by 2030. That's the goal. And so that's what's funding a lot of the Efficiency Maine Trust rebates and similar programs in the other New England states. And that's fine, good and well. I'm a little annoyed as somebody that's selling a legal product that I'm convening with my government. I'm trying to sell gas and they're selling electricity, but okay, fair enough. But altogether, if they're successful, that will generate 4 gigawatts of demand at peak, right? So say New England has 23 gigawatts now. At peak, we're going to add 4 on top of that to power all these heat pumps. And we aren't talking about building 4 more gigawatts of generation capacity. So where's that demand going to go? What do you think is going to happen to the prices?
Right. I mean, it's what's been happening. And what's interesting is one of the things I've noticed, because I used to work in banking and I knew people who had heat pumps, and then they would look at their electricity bill in the winter, and they would be like, ooh, and like, I'm not 100% against heat pumps. I like them more as air conditioners in the summer than heating in the winter.
I have heat pumps. I also have a wood stove and an oil furnace that I didn't turn off, so that as electricity gets crazy, I light a fire. Now, the carbon people are probably losing their mind over that, but that's I'm all about the Benjamins, man. I don't have unlimited money, so I gotta economize where I'm able, and I think most people are like that in Maine. Heat pumps in and of themselves are not good or bad; they just are. The problem in New England is it gets really cold. Heat pumps become less efficient. Do they still produce heat? Absolutely. They just take more energy to do it. And as energy gets scarce because the peak goes up and I can't generate anymore, and now I have to burn oil and I have to burn imported LNG, and I'm still not making enough. What does that mean? My grid is more fragile, so the potential for blackouts are there. But when people are reliant on the grid for heat in winter in New England, that becomes a really scary situation, because if you do black out during Winter Storm Fern and it's minus 11 outside for 4 days, you are quite literally going to kill people. And that's the gamble that we're running with this renewable quote unquote ideology, is that it's not reliable, and so it's going to cost more until it costs nothing because it won't work.
Yeah. So, I think we may have talked about this before, but I think it's always fun to go back to. So, I think in the short term, right, there's like a short term and a long term vision that is actually effective at being at the clean energy idea. And I had somebody on, I think I told you before we got on the podcast yesterday, to talk about AI in general, and we also went into the AI data center issue. And one of the interesting things that I find is, so you've got, just put a few things together, right? And I think consistency is not the strong suit of the Democrat Party, is one of the things that we could say. But here in the state of Maine, the Democrat Party is very anti-nuclear energy, it seems like. Which seems to be one of the best long-term solutions to be able to address affordable, reliable, resilient energy. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And so they seem to be opposed to even bringing that up as a possibility. I've not heard them once bring that up in one of their debates when they end up getting to talk about energy. They talk about how it's a problem. They got to figure out how to fix it, and we got to get more wind and solar out there. And that's basically it. Nothing like realistic, like ensuring that we maintain use as much hydro as we can. Nothing about like small modular nuclear, which we hear about from just about every. When I say just about, I mean every Republican gubernatorial candidate recognizes that this is a part of the potential solution. And obviously, the shorter term solution is like, we got to get that pipeline, for natural gas, so that we're not having to buy expensive LNG and whatnot, and getting rid of, they want to get rid of solar subsidies and stuff like that. But what's fascinating to this about me is that the two of the biggest, most, kind of left-leaning corporations in the country are Microsoft and Google. And Microsoft and Google are knowing that they're building a whole bunch of these AI data centers, or really data centers that will be serviced for AI, and recognizing the need for energy that's going to need to be able to maintain them, have built into their proposals the construction of nuclear power plants across the country.
Microsoft bought 3 Mile Island, essentially. And so they're paying for that to be refurbished and brought back online. That's going to power those. Google has any number of natural gas facilities. I think it's Amazon that is building 10 SMRs in Washington State to power their.
I'm pretty sure that Google announced, like, maybe in California is where they were.
Google is all, they're using everything, right? But that's the point. My favorite one so far is that natural gas. Part of the problem is the distribution network, right? So I've got to pay the pipeline operator and all the rest. Well, they've just announced in Texas a 7.3 gigawatt facility. For contrast, Boston uses about 10 gigawatts at peak. This is a 7.3 gigawatt facility that's located in the Permian Basin at the wellhead. So they've strapped their turbine right to the wellhead, so they don't pay any pipeline costs at all. They're just going to pump gas out of the ground and run their turbine. We're called that behind the meter generation. And that was one of the biggest flaws with the Maine program, is that it banned all data centers, whether or not they brought their own power or put power behind the meter, or there was no leeway one way or the other. And it's really, it's just about fear, and my problem is a civilization that doesn't build things anymore dies. And we are really flirting with that line right now. We won't approve or build anything. And, somebody joked with me the other day, the last thing we all agreed on was Elvis. But we don't want to build a pipeline, although Williams has reproposed the Constitution pipeline from Pennsylvania into New York. And we'll see. That would be very helpful for us. About 0.5 billion cubic feet a day into New England. That would be meaningful. All three of them would eliminate LNG, and oil. But it's a start. So we'll see if that gets approved. It's back in front of the federal government now for approval, but the state will have something to say. But all those things are important, and I don't disagree with you that nukes are important. But I think that's a 10-year solution, right? It's going to, in Maine to station a nuclear power plant again, it takes a statewide referendum. That was what was passed when we closed Maine Yankee. Now, it wasn't a constitutional amendment, so a legislature could repeal that and pass something else. But as it stands today, you have to pass a statewide referendum to site a nuclear reactor in Maine. So I think it's a 10-year problem, and I think we can build a pipeline in about a year or two. So let's do all those things. Let's stack them up.
Absolutely.
I think those are. I mean, the U.S. Navy has been running SMRs since 1954 on nuclear-powered ships, right? They never had an accident. Yeah. They run great, and we're the strongest Navy in the world. Well, maybe we could take a lesson.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it would make sense. Again, we got to use everything in our arsenal to ensure, because energy is going to be something that we're going to continue to need. I don't know if it's especially because of data centers. I wonder how much of the future is going to be kind of built by AI, and whether or not that continues to grow at the level it currently is.
I don't think we have to be that specific. I think if you look through history, human flourishing goes where power is affordable and abundant. Yeah. And that's been throughout history. One of the biggest problems in some of the more remote regions in Africa and in Asia is they don't have access to power. Why do 4 billion people today are wearing clothes that are washed by hand? Why? Well, it's because there's not enough electricity, not enough power to run a pump to run the water from the river or from the well up to the town, and there's not enough energy to run a washing machine. And so what happens? Typically, women and children haul the water up and wash the clothes. So these people that are restricting energy, especially to developing nations, are really anti-woman, anti-children, because all of those 4 billion clothes are being washed by 2 billion women who are now trapped in destitute, indentured service just because we won't permit them to have enough power. And on the other end of the scale, where you see countries and regions that have prospered, it's always because they had access to electricity and power and coal and then oil and then natural gas and all those things. And if you look at world history, there's only one fuel source that we've ever used that we're not using today, and that's whale oil. Every other fuel source today, the world burns more wood than it's ever burned in its history. We're using more natural gas. We've set the 5th consecutive year last year, 25, of coal use. And yes, we're adding solar and wind, but we're adding more of everything, guys. And we need more of everything. And prospering human flourishing requires abundant power. And until and unless we recognize that, we will do it at our peril.
Well, and it's interesting. I've been fortunate in a lot of ways to be able to experience some other parts of the world. And I will tell you that, like, it's fun to listen to people complain about things here in America, because, like, if we have the power go out for like a couple of hours, people lose their minds.
Oh yeah. How about a couple of weeks? How about every day? Or only having it for an hour a day, right? I mean,
there was a period of time where I know some people who live in Egypt, and like it was like a regular thing for about 2 hours in the afternoon. The power would just go out. And so they basically close down and then come back, after, and so it's so important, that's regular thing to have power outages and not have reliable energy, which is, again, so important to the advancement of people. And one of the things that angers me about this, fake, this kind of climate alarmism, is it's anti-human in the sense that it's actually getting in the way of those places actually being able to effectively advance their culture into the being less third world and more first world, because they're pushing these same types of like energy policies in places like that where people are literally starving because they don't have enough food. And instead of like putting in place policies that would increase productivity and give people more opportunities to have gainful employment and be able to take care of themselves, are the people who this is one of the biggest problems that I have with the globalist cabal that is the Democrat Party at the moment, is that they don't care about people. They care about controlling people and telling people what they can and cannot do.
I think there's some truth there. I mean, there's a reason why Africa doesn't support any world-class manufacturing facilities, but you can't do it on intermittent power. It doesn't work. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why China has become an industrial powerhouse, is they figured that out. 60% of their grid runs from domestic coal. They get it. And so, you have to have affordable, reliable, I keep saying it, resilient power systems if you're going to have an economy. And look what's happening in Maine. My last Substack, I wrote about 2 or 3 stories that seem unrelated. But Next Era Energy or Next Gen Energy, whatever it is, bought Dominion Energy for $67 billion in the Mid-Atlantic. They're the parent company of Florida Power and Light, and now they're the biggest utility in the country. Why? Because they realized they needed to scale to be able to provide enough electricity for the demand that's coming, both from data centers, but from manufacturing and electrification, all the rest. Meanwhile, out in California, the biggest franchisor of Carl's Jr.'s restaurants, which is, I don't know if you've ever been out there, a great burger place, great fast food joint, 59 stores. This franchisor just went into Chapter 11 because they can't pay their electricity bills. Add on that 2 stories in Maine. Gorham came out and forced to oppose Amazon distribution center, and 4 cities in Maine are contemplating data center bans in their burgs. And those 4 stories appear unrelated, but I think they're completely related. I think where you see energy that is restricted, where it's scarce, where it's expensive and difficult, you're seeing businesses close, you're seeing the climate, we don't want it. And then places where capital is welcomed, where industrial growth is happening, where demand is being encouraged, you're seeing $67 billion investments. And I think we're very quickly becoming a country of haves and have-nots, and it's all based around their electric policies. And that's what's happening to us in Maine. And if you don't think we're not having deindustrialization, you need to look again. We are losing every industrial business, and that might work in Boston. It might, because they've got 4 or 5 world-class universities, and they do a lot of research there. And there's and that might they have a much more intellectual economy. Maine has grown up on an industrial economy. We make paper, we make things, we make ships, and when you take away the ship makers and the paper makers because they can't get enough power to do it, you're left with 400,000 people on main care, and that's what we've done. And I don't view that as a policy failure. I feel that as a underlying of how much desperation there is in this state, because we've taken away the jobs that Maine is built on. And that's, to me, that's what this all boils down to. We have enough energy to be Mainers, or we don't, and we don't right now.
Yeah, and again, they've scared away business both with their energy policy, with their tax policy, and with the over-regulation that inhibits the ability for people to do business, build houses, build really anything. And we're reaping the consequences of that, which is why we desperately need a change in Augusta. I think conservatives largely agree on this. We're a little bit divided at the moment on who we think is the best one to lead us there. But
2.5 weeks left.
Can't wait till we get past it and we can just figure out how to get behind whoever.
Well, the beauty contest is over, and then we can really start talking about the difference in issues. And so I'm too. I'm looking forward to that. But I really think it's important for us to understand that underpinning everything in our economy is our ability to access power, electricity, gas, what have you. And they have systematically, our last 10 years of policies have systematically attempted to restrict our ability to get at power, and the results are in, and they're not good.
Can we say the last 8 years? I think the 2 years prior to that under LePage, that wasn't negative, right?
Well, maybe not just from a Maine perspective, but certainly from a New England perspective.
Yeah, we don't want to throw LePage under the bus.
No,
here.
in fairness for Paul, honestly, the assault on power happened, and I'm not so sure any of us saw what was really happening and how devastating it would be. And I think Paul would even tell you that that he didn't realize how devastating these policies and these ISO New England policies were, and that so New York's not permitting a pipeline. Well, that's what New York does, rather than, oh my God, that's a crisis, because it is. It absolutely is.
Absolutely. Yeah. So hopefully whoever gets in there can work with whoever they need to work with in order to ensure that we get access to, more.
It's a job, but it's possible. And you have an administration now that's interested in talking. Energy geeks like me probably are the only ones that know, but the energy secretary is phenomenal. He is just Chris Wright is his name. He came from Liberty Energy. He's an MIT geologist. PhD, brilliant guy. He just gets it. So, if you want to talk to him, you got a helpful listener there in Washington. If we would pick up the phone. Yeah.
Well, let's hope we get somebody in there to do that. And regardless of who gets elected as the next governor, hopefully we've got a legislature. We've got some people with some common sense and who will do the right thing by Maine. So that's what we need. How do we get there? People at home, have conversations with your friends and neighbors, talk to them about these very real issues, and ask them not just what the solutions that their candidate is presenting if they're promoting a Democrat, but what's the problem that they're trying to fix, and why are we here? And ask questions about the reliability of the grid, or just talk about the reliability of the grid, because it's that's really important. We need to have conversations with individuals. We're the ones who are most likely to reach our friends and neighbors, not social media, not the candidate, not television ads.
That's right.
We, as Maine people, having conversations with our friends and family and asking questions and doing a lot of listening to people and asking them why they think what they think, and challenging what they think with questions rather than preaching at people, is one of the ways which I think we have the best opportunity to be able to shape the future of our state. And we need to take this seriously. I don't want to be too alarmist and say, if we don't win this year, Maine is over. I don't think that's true, but I do think this is a really important election and that we have a really great opportunity. And if we execute on that opportunity, we can fix the state that we live in and make it much more affordable to live in and be able to maintain the beauty and wonder that is the state of Maine.
Well, I think people need to understand really the scale of what's happened to us. We probably spend as a region somewhere around $200 billion a year more for energy than we would if we'd have built those pipelines. Now that filters in to your hospital rates because the hospital is a big user of energy. So they're going to have to charge you more because their electricity costs more. Your gasoline prices cost more because distribution costs more, because energy costs more. Everything in the economy costs more. Hannaford, the refrigeration bill costs more, and they're going to pass that on to you. So that extra $200 billion, so a few politicians can virtue signal about windmills, is a big price to pay. And it has resulted in some of the highest costs in the country across the board before you even get to taxes, and the real phenomena where our children are leaving in droves and they're not coming back. And that's really the end game here, is that pretty soon 400,000 people on public assistance for healthcare. How many more businesses are we away from 500,000 or 600,000? Right? I don't think we're that far. And, if you look 10 years ago on the back of your T-shirt from your 10K, there were a lot more businesses that sponsored them than there are now because they've closed and they're gone. And that's an awful legacy to leave. And I think that's our danger right now. I really do. I think it's as stark as that.
So the short version, though, is it's not Trump's fault.
No, in fact, Trump has appointed, for my money, the very best energy secretary we've ever had. So no.
that was one of the other, again, like if I were to sum up the Democrat debates, is a competition for who can be more progressive, and then Angus King trying to present himself as the moderate, surprise, surprise, son of the independent, but committed to the Democrat Party. And
I have to step in. I worked for Angus at Summit for the better part of 7 years. I know and like him. He is a good guy, if not misguided on certain policies. But I think what you see is honest. He is that guy. I recognize him. But he is running a Democrat Party, and so there are certain things he's got to talk about. I did hear. I had a group of Democrats I was talking to the other night about these very issues, much to your encouragement here a while ago. But we were talking about it, and they said, well, we just need to remove the barriers and build more windmills. That's what needs to happen. and I said to them, I said, look, I'm a sailor. I am. And I have an old sailboat, and we go out. And when the wind's not blowing, and if the answer is just to launch more boats out there, there's just more boats out there. There's no more wind. We still can't sail. And that's really the point, is that the intermittency, which is a feature of windmills, make it so that you can't rely on it, and just building more of them doesn't work. Building more solar panels won't work at night. And I think, as we talked about before, you can't build enough batteries to make up for it. And shift that load. Batteries don't make electricity; they just store it. And so, if you've got a bunch of batteries standing next to a solar panel in the middle of the night, it's useless. And so that's part of the problem. We want it to be true so badly, but yet the cost is prohibitive.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So just to sum up the Democrat debate is, again, Trump is bad. He's the reason for all of our problems. Spend money, and compete on who can be the most progressive, except Angus, who wants to be presented as more moderate, but ultimately still holds to all the same ideals, but is not wanting to promise that he'll spend money that he can't promise that he'll actually be able to spend. And so it's fascinating that like all of the problems are just that we're not spending more money. And again, there's no effective diagnosis of how we got here, but more just like the answer is to spend more money. It's disheartening. Like you sometimes wonder, are they ever going to wake up and be like, man, maybe we've gone so far crazy that we could actually easily gain control if we just moderated a little bit. But instead they're like, no, we must double down on being as progressive as possible, which by the way, Troy Jackson is the most progressive. So that's what you're looking for. He's your guy. And I think he has a fake accent. I don't know. Maybe it's real. It seems fake. It's just weird.
And what's interesting about Troy is several years ago when the OPA introduced a bill in the Maine legislature to ban natural gas in Maine. A lot of people don't know that happened, but that happened in 23. And I was in the committee hearing room because we were adamant that was a bad public policy piece. Then President of the Senate, Jackson, came into the committee room and testified against the bill. That no, we can't ban natural gas. We need it, which was welcome and correct and all the things. But you don't recognize that guy today with some of the rhetoric I hear about energy. So it is, again, we go back to consistency, and it's we have precious little of it.
Well, I mean, when they control the media, they don't need to be consistent because they're not going to get called out on it.
Well, that's fair. Yeah. I've said this a while. I think I've said this to you, that I blame the media phenomenon on Ted Turner. When he figured out you could monetize the news, then the news became like every other product that went for its demo. And so the Press Herald picked a demographic. Some people are ideologic, but they picked the demographic that they hope will click and rage bait or whatever. But they're targeting a demographic to sell soap. I don't know that anybody that owns it really believes all that stuff. I think that they're just trying to sell soap. More ad space. That's
the only thing that's interesting about that is I don't think the liberal news media is making money. I think that they're controlled by organizations that are willing to lose money. But it's the attempt.
It's the attempt to target a demographic rather than as opposed to Huntley Brinkley or Walter Cronkite.
I guess they're making money in the sense that they're able to influence people at a lower cost than they would if they had to do it without controlling the media.
But I honestly think they're doubling down on that whole marketing piece. But it's all very interesting. I don't like to howl at the darkness. I mean, I know what I got.
I do a little bit, but
a little bit. But I know it's dark. I'm not going to scream at the dark. I just gotta keep talking about energy policy and give people an opportunity to learn another perspective and the truth, frankly. And like you said, let's diagnose the problem. Why does electricity prices go up in the winter in Maine? Well, let's diagnose that. Why does that happen? Well, 60% of our electricity comes from natural gas. Our natural gas prices, because of supply and demand in the winter, are 5 times more expensive than they are in, say, Wisconsin. So that means your bill, the fuel that generates electricity, is exposed to a 5x increase in what it costs the generators to make that electricity. How does that hurt Sappi? Well, Sappi's sister mill is in Wisconsin. They're paying 5 times less for energy, for natural gas in Wisconsin than they pay for it here. What does that mean for every other business and every other residence? Well, it spikes because we don't have a big enough pipe and we have to get our fuel from other sources that are more expensive. That's all. And so once you understand that, the question is, can I make electricity an alternative way? And yes, there are some alternative generators, but they're intermittent and they're not reliable, and underlying and backing them up has to be what we call firm generation. And that today means natural gas. Someday it could be nuclear, but today that's natural gas. And if you restrict the fuel, then you necessarily restrict the amount of electricity we can make, and you're going to generate more costs. And that's what we've done. So that's the non-political, just the honest answer of the diagnosis of the problem. That's why your electricity prices go up, because the underlying fuel to make it is restricted into New England. And so supply and demand, the cost goes up. Now, given that you know that now, you can now evaluate every candidate and every politician in every office. Are they correctly diagnosing the problem too? And number one, are they offering solutions to solve that problem? And I'll leave it to your listeners to decide. But to me, let's define the problem and then listen for solutions. I don't hear a lot of solutions except build more wind. And again, the scenario where I put more sailboats out on the lake when there's no wind means you're going to have more boats floating around, not more wind. And that's essentially the problem. When it's dark, when it's cloudy in Maine, when there's snow covering the solar panel, what do we need then? And that's the second piece. How do you back it up?
And that's all aside from all of and we don't need to get into it, but we'll wrap up here. But that's all of that is aside from the negative environmental impact of wind and solar, which the people that are supposedly environmentalists don't really want to talk about. But there's a lot there.
Absolutely, there are trade-offs there. But the negative, because I have to back it up, and because I've restricted natural gas, I'm burning oil. And instead of burning gas that comes in a pipe, I'm burning gas that comes with a ship. Well, it's way less, it's way more carbon intensive than it would have been if we just built those pipelines. And oh, by the way, about $200 billion a year cheaper.
Yeah, which is just an incredible amount of money, which would be nice in
the economy doing other things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like maybe helping with things that would provide jobs.
Maybe building new businesses, maybe new job creation. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So
there's a lot of opportunity here, Chuck. A lot of opportunity.
Tons of opportunity. I'm really hopeful. I really like there are challenges. I always some people see me as a downer, I think, when I say this, but I think it has to be said, right? And that's why I keep saying it, because I want to be hopeful, and I am hopeful because of how bad the Democrats have done. But we have to look at reality, and this is I say this to remind people and motivate people that this isn't going to happen on its own, and we need to be involved in the process, and we need to talk to people. We need to do our part, volunteer, give, whatever it needs to be in order to make this happen, because Trump lost Maine by 6.5%. Trump, in my opinion, one of the best policy presidents we've ever had. Not perfect. I don't agree with him on everything, but policy-wise, really, really great policy president. Yeah. And he was running against probably the worst presidential candidate in U.S. history. The number two and three competitors in the race for the worst were the previous two that the Democrats put forward, and Biden and Hillary. And he lost Maine by 6.5%. So I highlight that to say this is not going to work itself out. No. It's going to require us to work hard. I think there's opportunity because none of the candidates are named Donald Trump, and there is a lot of TDS and Trump hatred here in the state of Maine. But like things are really bad, and if you actually pay attention, you look at who holds the receipts for what led to this. It is the Democrat Party. And so I think there's a lot of energy, and I think that there's a lot of reason to have hope, but we got to work hard, and we got to make sure, because I'm really excited. I want to see what happens when we get a Republican governor.
I'm really hopeful, especially on energy policy, because this is all solvable. It really is. Yeah. But we got to want to. Right. Honestly,
if we get a Republican governor in there, and by chance we have the Republican legislature, like they don't have to do much to look like heroes, because there's so much there. Like if they half-ass it, they're going to look like they were the best in the history of the world, because there are so many problems that you can just easily roll back, and it will make Maine much more competitive, lead to so much economic growth.
I think that's absolutely.
So I'm really excited to see what happens when we get a Republican governor in the Blaine House. So, well, thank you again, Matt. I always appreciate the conversations with you, and would love to have you on again some point in the future, obviously. And thank you all for watching. We'll be back here next week with who knows what. At the very least, John Featherston on Tuesday. We get that every week. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you later.